Hey there, I'm Zoe. I've always been good at reading people. It's probably why I became a psychologist. I had my own private practice and spent most of my waking hours helping others sort out their problems. Ironic, right? Considering what happened later. Anyway, there I was, approaching my late 30s, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted a family. Crazy how that sneaks up on you. My best friend, Sarah, must have sensed my sudden desperation because she offered to set me up with her second cousin. "Come on, Zoe," she said over coffee one day. "He's a great guy. Smart, funny, and he's got a good job. What be you got to lose?" I sighed, stirring my latte absently. "I don't know, Sarah. Blind dates aren't really my thing." She rolled her eyes. "It's not a blind date if I show you his picture first. Besides, you two can chat online before meeting. It's perfect." That's how I found myself friend requesting Mark on social media later that evening. To my surprise, we hit it off right away. Mark was 38, just a year older than me, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Our chats were easy, flowing from one topic to the next without any awkward pauses. We chatted for weeks before finally agreeing to meet in person. I was nervous as hell, palms sweating as I waited for him at the coffee shop we'd chosen for our first date. When Mark walked in, I felt my breath catch. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He spotted me and waved, making his way over to my table. "Zoe?" he asked, extending his hand. I nodded, returning his smile. "That's me. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Mark." He sat down across from me, and just like that, the nerves melted away. We talked for hours, losing track of time until the barista politely informed us they were closing. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Mark turned to me. "I had a great time, Zoe. Would you like to do this again sometime?" I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." And just like that, I found myself falling headfirst into a relationship with Mark. We started seeing each other regularly, going on dinner dates, walks in the park, and even a few weekend getaways. As our relationship progressed, I noticed something peculiar about Mark. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have busy lives, right? But the frequency was unusual, even for a popular guy. One night, as we lay in bed after a nice dinner, his phone lit up for what felt like the 100th time. I couldn't help myself. "Busy night, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mark glanced at his phone and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, it's just my mom. She likes to check in." I raised an eyebrow. "Your mom? At this hour?" He shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. "Yeah, we're pretty close. She raised me alone after my dad died when I was 5. I had pretty bad bronchial asthma as a kid. There were times she literally saved my life." I listened as Mark opened up about his childhood. The more he talked, the clearer the picture became. His mother wasn't just devoted, she was his entire world. "Sounds like you two have a special bond," I said, choosing my words carefully. Mark nodded enthusiastically. "We do. I owe her everything." As a psychologist, alarm bells were ringing in my head. The relationship Mark described sounded codependent, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I wasn't his therapist, I was his girlfriend. It wasn't my place to analyze their relationship. Weeks turned into months, and soon we'd been dating for nearly a year. Mark was sweet, attentive, and our relationship felt solid. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind about his relationship with his mother. One day, as we were having lunch at my place, Mark suddenly looked nervous. "Zoe," he began, fidgeting with his napkin. "I'd like you to meet my mom. I think you'll really like her. She's excited to meet you too." The next weekend, I found myself standing outside a modest 2-story house, my palms sweating. Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open, revealing a petite woman with graying hair and Mark's kind eyes. She smiled warmly at us. You must be Zoe, she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. I'm Helen. Come in, come in. As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice how Helen's eyes never left Mark. She fussed over him, asking if he wanted a drink or a snack, completely ignoring my presence. I watched their interaction, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Helen dominated the conversation, constantly bringing up stories from Mark's childhood or fretting over his health. As we left a few hours later, I felt drained. Mark, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. So, what did you think? He asked eagerly as we drove away. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Your mom clearly loves you very much. Mark beamed. She's great, isn't she? I knew you'd like her. I forced a smile, not having the heart to burst his bubble. But as we drove back to my place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something far more complex than a mother's love. 6 months flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was down on one knee, a sparkling ring in his hand. Despite my lingering concerns about his relationship with Helen, I said yes. I was in love, and I truly believed we could work through any issues together. We decided to move in together, into my apartment, of course. As we dove into wedding preparations, I quickly realized this wasn't going to be the fun, exciting experience I'd always imagined. Helen inserted herself into every decision, every detail. It wasn't just the wedding, either. Helen called constantly, always with some crisis that required Mark's immediate attention. One evening, as we were discussing flower arrangements, Mark's phone rang. He answered immediately, his face creasing with concern. What's wrong, Mom? The sink's leaking? I'll be right there. He hung up and turned to me apologetically. I've got to go help Mom. Her sink is leaking, and you know how she is with plumbers. This scene repeated itself almost daily. If it wasn't a leaky sink, it was a stubbed toe or a sad mood that only Mark could lift. And if he ever hesitated. After all I've done for you, Helen's voice would crack over the speakerphone. I just need a little help. Is that too much to ask? I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after Mark returned from yet another Helen emergency, I decided to broach the subject. Mark, I said gently, I think it might be helpful if we saw a couples therapist. Someone who could help us navigate this situation with your mom. I think her demands are a bit excessive. Excessive? Mark's voice rose. She raised me alone, Zoe. She saved my life multiple times. How can you call that excessive? I backpedaled, realizing I'd hit a nerve. I'm not saying she doesn't love you. I'm just worried about the impact on our relationship. Mark softened slightly. Okay, maybe you're right, but can we do it after the wedding? We're so busy right now, and I don't want to add more stress. I knew I should push harder, insist on addressing this before we tied the knot. But I was exhausted from fighting this invisible battle with Helen. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, dress fittings, and endless phone calls with Helen. Before I knew it, we were just days away from the wedding. Despite the stress, I was excited. My friends had planned a bachelorette party, and I was looking forward to a night of fun without wedding talk or Helen drama. We hit our favorite bar, laughing and dancing. For the first time in months, I felt light, free from the constant tension of planning a wedding under Helen's watchful eye. Then my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. Zoe, his voice was tight with panic. Mom's in the hospital. Her blood pressure spiked. I'm heading there now. I quickly explained the situation to my friends and called a taxi. The ride to the hospital felt endless, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The moment Helen saw me, her face crumpled. Oh, she moaned, dramatically covering her face with her hands. It's you. My blood pressure, it's your fault. All this wedding stress. I froze, shocked by the accusation. Helen peeked through her fingers, her eyes narrowing at me. I can't handle this right now, my poor heart. Mark turned to me, his expression apologetic but firm. "Zoe, could you wait outside? Just for a bit?" Stunned, I nodded and walked out, collapsing into a chair in the hallway. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, nurses and doctors bustling past me. Finally, I stood up, determined to understand what was happening. I approached the nurse's station, using every ounce of my professional demeanor. "Excuse me," I said to the doctor charting nearby. "I'm Zoe, Helen Johnson's future daughter-in-law. Could you tell me about her condition?" The doctor looked up, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Johnson's blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so. We're monitoring her, but there's no immediate cause for concern." I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. "Doctor, I'm a psychologist. And I'm concerned that Mrs. Johnson might be dealing with some psychological issues. Has anyone evaluated her mental health?" The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting observation. We haven't done a psychological evaluation, but given what you're saying, it might be worth looking into. I'll make a note to refer her for an assessment." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your help." Returning to my seat in the hallway, I waited a bit longer, hoping Mark would emerge. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he wasn't coming out anytime soon. Defeated, I sent him a text, heading home. "Call me when you can." I called another taxi and went back to our apartment. My phone buzzed with messages from my friends, asking where I'd disappeared to. I sent a quick apology, telling them to enjoy the rest of the night without me. It was past midnight when I heard the key in the lock. Mark shuffled in, looking exhausted. "Hey," he said softly. "You're still up." I sat up, trying to keep the hurt and anger out of my voice. "How's your mom?" He sighed, sinking into the armchair across from me. "She's okay. They're keeping her overnight for observation." I stayed until she fell asleep. She was so upset, Zoe. She kept asking me not to leave her alone. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, do you really think that's all it is? Don't you see what's happening here?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Zoe, please, not tonight. Can we just go to bed? I'm exhausted." I wanted to argue, to make him see reason. But looking at his tired face, I knew it was pointless. So I nodded, swallowing my frustration. The big day finally arrived. Mark pulled me aside just before the ceremony and took a deep breath. "Look, I know things have been tense with Mom lately. But I've made some arrangements to keep her happy today. I just need you to go along with it, please?" My heart sank. "What kind of arrangements?" Mark explained quickly. Helen had a special menu prepared for her, citing non-existent allergies. She'd be seated next to Mark at the head table, not with the other parents. The DJ had a list of her favorite songs to play. And, Mark added hesitantly, she wants to make a speech. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Okay," I said finally. "For you, for us." He kissed me gratefully, and I returned to my bridesmaids, plastering on a smile. The ceremony itself was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Mark's face light up, I felt a surge of love that pushed all my doubts aside. For a moment, it was just us. The reception was an experience. True to Mark's word, Helen held court at our table, regaling everyone with stories of Mark's childhood. She barely acknowledged my presence, except to occasionally pat my hand condescendingly. When it came time for speeches, I watched in horror as Helen tottered up to the microphone, wine glass in hand. "My dear friends and family," she began, her voice wavering. "We're here to celebrate my only son's wedding day." She went on for what felt like hours, talking about Mark's childhood, his accomplishments, and how she'd sacrificed everything for him. I was mentioned exactly once, as an afterthought. As she finally wrapped up, Helen raised her glass. "To my son, and his wife. May they be as happy as Mark and I have always been." I downed my champagne in one gulp. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We danced, we laughed, we cut the cake. And through it all, Helen hovered, always ready to interject herself into every moment. The wedding is over, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, nothing changed. Helen called every day, sometimes multiple times a day. There was always some crisis, some reason she needed Mark's immediate attention. One day, as he grabbed his keys, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, we need to talk about this. It's not healthy, for any of us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, you're right. We should see someone. A therapist, like you suggested. Let's look into it this weekend." But when the weekend came, there was always some reason to postpone. Helen needed help with her grocery shopping. The lawn needed mowing. The cat needed to go to the vet. And so it went, week after week. Empty promises and endless excuses. 3 months into our marriage, I was at my wit's end. The constant intrusions from Helen, Mark's unwillingness to set boundaries, and the strain on our relationship were taking their toll. When my vacation time came around, I saw it as a golden opportunity. "Mark," I said one evening, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "let's go on a honeymoon. Just the two of us, away from everything. What do you say?" To my surprise and relief, Mark's face lit up. "That sounds amazing, Zoe. Where do you want to go?" We spent the next hour excitedly planning a tropical getaway. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This was our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. "I'll take care of everything," Mark promised. "The flights, the hotel, all of it. And when we get back, I promise we'll deal with the situation with Mom. Maybe look into that therapy we talked about." The day of our departure arrived, and I was practically bouncing with excitement as we drove to the airport. Mark seemed a bit distracted, but I chalked it up to pre-flight jitters. As we approached the check-in counter, Mark handed me my boarding pass. I glanced at it, then did a double take. "Economy?" I asked, confused. "I thought we were flying together." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, about that. I had some credit card bonuses I could use, but there was only enough for one first-class ticket. I figured since I'm taller, it made sense for me to take it. It'll save us money overall." I stared at him, hurt and bewildered. "But, it's our honeymoon. Couldn't we have both flown economy and sat together?" "Come on, Zoe," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. It's just a few hours." Swallowing my disappointment, I tried one last time. "Okay, well, can I at least come to the first-class lounge with you before the flight? We could pay extra." "No," Mark cut me off quickly. "The ticket's in my name. They won't let you in." "Look, I've got to go check in. I'll see you on the other side, okay?" Before I could respond, he was gone, wheeling his suitcase towards the first-class check-in. Feeling deflated, I made my way through security and to the regular boarding lounge. As I sat there, trying to salvage my excitement for the trip, a familiar figure caught my eye. There, just outside the first-class lounge, I saw a flash of graying hair and a floral dress that looked suspiciously like something Helen would wear. My heart started racing. Was I imagining things? Had the stress of the past few months finally made me paranoid? But Mark's strange behavior, his insistence on flying first class alone, his refusal to let me into the lounge, it all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Before I could talk myself out of it, I marched up to the first-class lounge desk. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my credit card. "I'd like to purchase access to the lounge, please." The attendant looked skeptical, but processed my payment. As she handed me the access card, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find. I pushed open the door to the lounge, my eyes scanning the plush seats and buffet tables. And there, in a quiet corner by the window, sat Mark and Helen, heads close together over cups of coffee. They looked comfortable, like they were embarking on their own little adventure. I took a deep breath and strode towards Mark and Helen, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. They both looked up as I approached, and I saw the color drain from Mark's face. "Zoe," he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Care to explain why you're here with your mother instead of your wife?" Mark glanced nervously around the lounge. "Zoe, please," he said in a low voice. "Let's not do this here. I can explain everything after we land, I promise." Before I could respond, Helen chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Zoe dear, what a surprise. Mark and I are just about to take off for a lovely first-class trip together. Isn't that nice? But what are you doing in this lounge?" Mark stepped between us, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Zoe, I'm sorry. The truth is, there were enough bonus points for 2 first-class tickets. I thought Mom deserved a nice trip, and what about me, Mark?" I practically shouted, no longer caring about the scene we were causing. "I'm your wife. We're supposed to be starting our life together, but instead, you're jetting off with Mommy dearest while I'm shoved in economy like an afterthought." The lounge had gone completely silent. Every eye was on us, but I was beyond caring. "Do you have any idea what it's been like these past few months?" I continued, years of frustration pouring out. "The constant calls, the emergencies, the way you always put her first. And now this? How could you do this to me?" Mark reached out to touch my arm, but I jerked away. "Zoe, please," he pleaded. "You need to calm down. We can work this out. Once we're on vacation, we'll have time to talk, to get closer. We can fix this, I promise." I stared at him, suddenly feeling very calm and very, very tired. "Fix this?" I repeated quietly. "Mark, there's nothing left to fix. I'm going home and I'm filing for divorce." Mark's jaw dropped. "Divorce? Zoe, you can't be serious." But Helen cut him off, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She stood up and linked her arm through Mark's. "Well, if that's how you feel, dear, I think it's for the best. Come along, Mark. We don't want to miss our flight." I watched in stunned silence as Helen led Mark away. He looked back at me once, his expression a mix of regret and relief, before they disappeared through the boarding gate. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares. Then, without a word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the lounge. As I made my way through the airport, my mind was oddly blank. I should have been crying, screaming, feeling something. But all I felt was a strange sense of liberation. I spent the next few hours gathering Mark's belongings. Clothes, books, the silly knickknacks his mother always bought him. I packed it all up methodically, my mind oddly calm. When I was done, I called a courier service and had everything sent to a nearby storage facility. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the right decision, I knew it in my bones. Instead of wallowing, I decided to use my vacation time for myself. I redecorated the apartment, erasing all traces of Mark. I reconnected with old friends, started yoga classes, and spent long hours reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. A month passed, and my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Zoe, please, can we talk?" I typed out a brief response. "Storage facility number 247. Access code 8891. Your things are there. Divorce papers have been sent to your mother's address. Please sign and return them." Then I blocked his number. Returning to work was like a breath of fresh air. I threw myself into my practice with renewed energy. My experiences, painful as they were, had given me new insights into codependent relationships. I channeled this knowledge into a series of research papers, carefully anonymizing the details. To my surprise and delight, these papers caught the attention of the psychology department at the local college. They invited me to give a guest lecture, which turned into an offer for a part-time teaching position. It was at the college that I met James. He was a fellow professor in the psychology department, tall, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We bonded over shared research interests and a mutual love of terrible puns. As the weeks passed, James and I grew closer. He was everything Mark wasn't: independent, respectful of boundaries, and wonderfully self-assured. He had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage, and watching him balance his role as a father with his career and our budding relationship was a revelation. One evening, as we were grading papers together, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my old friend who had originally set me up with Mark. "Hey Zoe," it read. "Thought you should know, Mark's still living with Helen. If anything, they seem even closer now. I'm so sorry for my part in all this. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a moment, then set my phone aside. James looked up, concern in his eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I truly was all right. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's fine." And it was. Mark and Helen's relationship was no longer my problem. I had my own life to live, my own path to follow.
Hi, I'm Patricia, a 28-year-old marketing exec, and I've got a story that might hit close to home for some of you. It all started on a sunny Saturday at the annual William Advertising Company picnic. You'd think it'd be a time to unwind, right? Wrong. There I was, watching my dad, David William, the big shot CEO, fawning over John, the company's shiny new hire. "John, my boy, that presentation you gave last week was outstanding. You've got a real future here," Dad boomed, clapping John on the back. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my brain. John had been here for 5 minutes? Meanwhile, I just secured the Pearson account, a major win, but apparently that wasn't worth a mention. "Thanks, Mr. William," John said, soaking up the praise like a sponge. I clenched my teeth, vowing to prove my worth. Little did I know, this moment was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. For now, though, I had a picnic to survive and a father to impress. Wish me luck. Something told me I'd need it. After that disaster of a picnic, I threw myself into work like never before. I landed a massive project, rebranding for a major tech company. If this didn't impress Dad, nothing would. I was knee-deep in spreadsheets when my assistant Tom knocked on my office door. "Hey, Patricia, got those reports you asked for? John's team just sent them over." "Thanks, Tom. I'll take a look." As I flipped through the reports, something felt off. The projections looked too good to be true. Pulling up old data for comparison, I froze. No, this couldn't be right. I dug deeper, cross-referencing everything. It wasn't just one report. It was a trail of falsified data and plagiarized ideas. John had been conning everyone. Fuming, I marched toward my dad's office only to pause when I heard voices. The door was slightly ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. "David, we need to talk about John," Linda, Dad's longtime colleague and John's mother, said, her tone tense. "What about him? He's doing great work," Dad replied. "That's not what I mean. He's asking questions about his father." A long pause followed, and my stomach dropped. "No way," Dad muttered. "David, we agreed never to tell him," Linda said. "I know, but he's not stupid. He's noticing how you treat him compared to Patricia. People are talking." My head spun. John, my half-brother. It explained so much, but God, it hurt. "We can't let this get out," Dad said. "Think of the scandal. Think of Elena." That was it. I stumbled back to my office, struggling to process everything. My whole life felt like a lie. I needed answers. Grabbing my phone, I called my mom. "Hey, sweetie. Everything okay?" "Mom, I need to see you. Can you come over?" An hour later, we sat in my living room. Mom's face was etched with worry. "Patricia, what's wrong?" "You're scaring me." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I know about Dad and Linda. I know about John." Her face paled. "Oh, Patricia, is it true? Is John my half-brother?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "I'm so sorry, honey. We never wanted you to find out like this." "How long have you known?" "Since John was born. Your father, he made a mistake. But we decided to work through it, for your sake. Anger and hurt boiled over. For my sake. Do you even know how Dad's treated me all these years? Always comparing me to John, like I'm never good enough. I've tried to talk to him, Patricia. But what, Mom? You just let it happen. Let him favor his secret son over me. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Patricia, you can't tell anyone about this. It would ruin our family. The company. Ruin our family? Newsflash, Mom. It's already ruined. It has been for years. I stood up, pacing. And what about John's fraud? Yeah, I found out about that too. He's been falsifying reports and stealing ideas. Are we supposed to keep that quiet too? Mom looked shocked. Are you sure? Dead sure. I've got proof. She buried her face in her hands. Oh God. David can't know you know. He'll think you're just trying to discredit John out of jealousy. Jealousy? He's a fraud, Mom. He's hurting the company. Please, Patricia, give me some time. Let me talk to your father. We can figure this out without exposing everything. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. You've got 1 week, Mom. After that, I'm going to the board with what I know about John's work. The family stuff. I'll keep quiet about that for now. Mom exhaled in relief, but I wasn't done. I want you to know something. I'm done trying to impress Dad. I'm done comparing myself to John. From now on, I'm doing this for me. The week Mom asked for flew by, and I was no closer to figuring out my next move. Sitting on the information felt wrong, but exposing John meant risking everything. My career, my family's reputation, and the company's future. I needed backup. I called Susan and Mike, colleagues I trusted implicitly, and arranged to meet them at a cafe far from the office. Okay, Patricia, what's with the cloak and dagger routine? Susan asked as we settled into a corner booth. Yeah, you're starting to freak us out, Mike added. I took a deep breath. I've uncovered serious fraud at the company. John's been falsifying reports and stealing ideas. Their jaws dropped. Mike leaned in, his voice low. Are you sure? That's a heavy accusation. I'm sure. I've got proof, plenty of it. But there's more. Personal stuff I can't get into. Let's just say exposing John could blow up in all our faces. Susan narrowed her eyes. What aren't you telling us, Patricia? Trust me, it's better if you don't know. But I need your help to build an airtight case, one that focuses solely on his professional misconduct. Mike nodded slowly. I'm in. What do you need? For the next week, we worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and triple-checking every detail. The tension at work was unbearable. Dad was on the warpath, suspicious and snappish. Patricia, why aren't the Johnson reports on my desk? He barked one morning. I'm still reviewing them, Dad. There are some discrepancies. Discrepancies? John's team handled those. Are you saying he made a mistake? I bit my tongue. I'm just being thorough. He scoffed. Be thorough faster. We can't all coast on our laurels. John wasn't faring much better. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by furtive glances and venomous glares in my direction. Late one night, I was grabbing coffee in the break room when Linda cornered me. I hope you know what you're doing, Patricia. Some secrets are better left buried. I turned to face her. I'm just doing my job, Linda. Maybe you should have taught John to do the same. Her eyes flashed. You have no idea what you're messing with. Back off while you still can. Is that a threat? She smiled, cold and calculated, before walking away. Later that night, I received an anonymous email. My hands trembled as I opened the attachment. Financial records exposing years of Dad's shady business dealings. This wasn't just about John anymore. The entire company was built on lies. I stared at my screen, feeling sick. This was bigger than I ever imagined. There was no going back now. The truth was coming out, one way or another. The investigation felt like it dragged on for an eternity, though it was only a few weeks. The tension in the office was suffocating. Dad avoided me entirely. John was a nervous wreck. And Linda? If looks could kill, I'd have been 6 feet under. Finally, the board called for a company-wide meeting. My palms were clammy as we filed into the conference room. The head of the board began, his voice steady but grave. After a thorough investigation, we've uncovered significant misconduct. Effective immediately, John William is terminated. A collective gasp rippled through the room. John shot to his feet, face red with fury. This is bull. Sit down, Mr. William, the board member snapped. We're not finished. The room fell silent. In light of the extent of the fraud and the apparent lack of oversight, we are also calling for a vote of no confidence in David Williams' leadership. Dad's face went pale as the words sank in. He turned to me, his eyes a mix of anger and betrayal. I couldn't meet his gaze. Furthermore, the board member continued, we'd like to appoint Patricia William as interim CEO. Her integrity in bringing this matter to our attention, along with her proven track record, makes her the ideal candidate to lead us through this transition. My head spun. CEO? Me? This wasn't what I wanted, was it? The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Dad cleared out his office, John disappeared without a word, and suddenly I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered company. One evening, as I was working late, again, there was a knock at my office door. I looked up to see Dad standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Patricia, can we talk? I nodded, bracing myself. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I've made so many mistakes. The affair with Linda, the way I treated you, I was wrong about everything. I wanted to feel something, anger, satisfaction, anything, but all I felt was emptiness. It's too late, Dad. Way too late. I know, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. I just hope someday you can forgive me. As he turned to leave, I called out, Dad, he paused, looking back. I don't hate you. I don't need your approval anymore. The months that followed were grueling but rewarding. We managed to save the company, rebuilding it on a foundation of honesty and hard work. Mom and I grew closer, both of us healing from years of deception. Dad faced multiple lawsuits and lost most of his assets in the divorce. Last I heard, John was struggling to find work, his reputation in tatters. Tonight, I'm meeting Susan and Mike for drinks. As we chat and laugh, I can't help but reflect on the wild journey that brought me here. It wasn't easy, and God knows it wasn't pretty. But for the first time in my life, I feel free from the need to prove myself, free from the shadow of my father's expectations. I raise my glass to honesty, hard work, and writing our own stories. Would you have exposed John's fraud, knowing it could destroy your family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hi everyone, I'm Pamela Collins, a 32-year-old interior designer based in Chicago, known for my modern minimalist designs. I first met him at a luxury property showing. Mark Anderson, with his perfect smile and tailored suits, was everything I thought I wanted. He was a successful real estate developer who could charm anyone in the room. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Pamela, you're different from all the rest, he would say, melting my heart during our whirlwind 6-month romance. God, I was so naive. The red flags were there from day one after our wedding, but love truly makes you blind. His ex-wife, Margaret, was always around, always had some emergency that needed Mark's immediate attention. Baby, she's just going through a rough time. You know how messy divorces can be, he'd reassure me every single time he rushed to her aid. Pamela, darling, that centerpiece arrangement is interesting. Margaret always had such an eye for these things. My mother-in-law, Amanda, quipped during our first family dinner, never missing a chance to compare me to Margaret, always with that fake smile plastered on her face. Don't take it personally, Rachel, Mark's sister, would say. Mom's just old-fashioned. Later, I would learn Rachel had been feeding Margaret information about every aspect of my life. Thank God for my best friend, Megan. Something's not adding up, Pamela. The way they operate, it's like a well-oiled machine designed to break you down. Megan, being a private investigator, noticed things others missed. Mark still has joint accounts with Margaret. That's not normal for divorced couples, she pointed out, her words echoing in my head when I discovered their shared credit cards. Family gatherings were the worst. Amanda would host these elaborate dinners where Margaret was always invited. She's still family, they'd say. I'd sit there, watching them share inside jokes and memories, while I felt like an outsider. Margaret was just telling me about the charity gala she's organizing. Pamela, dear, what have you been up to, besides decorating? Amanda's subtle digs became more frequent. Then I met Marcus at a business event. You're Mark's new wife. Interesting. Margaret never mentioned he was officially divorced. The look in his eyes told me there was more to the story. The emergencies with Margaret became more frequent. Her car broke down, she needed help with paperwork, she was feeling down and needed support. Pamela, you need to be more understanding. Margaret's been part of this family for 10 years, Mark would say, making me feel like I was the problem. But little did they know, I was starting to see through their perfect facade. Megan was gathering information, and I was keeping detailed records of every incident, every manipulation, every lie. They thought they had me cornered, playing the role of the naive new wife, but they had no idea what was coming. Could you bring us some more tea, sweetie? Amanda's voice dripped with fake sweetness. I walked into the living room, tea tray in hand, and froze. There was Margaret, standing in my wedding dress. The one I'd worn just 8 months ago, posing for the annual family photos. What the hell is going on? My hands shook as I set down the tray. Oh, Pamela, don't make a scene. It's a family tradition, Mark interjected in that condescending tone I had grown to hate. The Anderson women always wear this dress for the spring photo shoot. Family tradition? This is my wedding dress. I bought it with my own money. You're being hysterical, Amanda chimed in. Margaret wore it last year, and Rachel the year before that. Last year? You weren't even divorced then. The room went silent. Rachel quickly grabbed her phone, probably texting Margaret updates about my meltdown. That night, I couldn't sleep. While Mark was showering, I checked our joint accounts. Something wasn't adding up. $5,000 to VA Interior Consulting every month. Margaret didn't even work in interior design. Hey Em, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Megan's voice was concerned when I met her for coffee the next day. I need you to look into something. Mark has been making regular payments to a company I've never heard of. Already on it. And Pamela, there's something else. His business dealings are sketchy. Like really sketchy. That evening, Mark's phone buzzed while he was in the shower. A message from Margaret popped up. Miss you, baby. Thanks for handling the dress situation. Your wife's face was priceless. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their conversation. Dinner dates, hotel meetings, joint bank accounts. Pamela, huh? You seem stressed lately. Perhaps this business of yours is too much to handle. Amanda's comment at Sunday dinner made Rachel snicker. I'm just worried about her, Rachel said later, hugging me. You know you can tell me anything. The same Rachel who had been forwarding my private texts to Margaret. I discovered credit card statements in Mark's office, Margaret's shopping sprees, spa treatments, even her rent, all paid for by my husband. Marriage is about trust, Pamela. Why are you going through my things? Mark caught me with the statements. Trust? Like paying your ex-wife's bills behind my back. She's going through a rough patch. You're making something out of nothing. Nothing. Like the hotel charges on your card when you were supposedly at business meetings. You're paranoid. This is exactly what happened with your last relationship. You always create problems where there aren't any. He was trying to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't that naive anymore. I've been documenting everything, the secret payments, the manipulative texts, the gaslighting. You should be grateful, Amanda said at yet another family dinner. Mark is such a caring man, helping Margaret through hard times. Most wives would appreciate such compassion. I smiled and played along, letting them think they were winning. But with every revelation, with every lie exposed, their perfect little world was on the brink of collapse. Megan's investigation was uncovering more dirt than I had ever imagined. They had no idea what was coming. You're not going to believe what I found, Megan said, spreading documents across her office desk. Those luxury developments Mark brags about. They're all shell companies. He's been taking investors' money and funneling it through fake construction projects. My hands trembled as I sifted through the paperwork, bank statements, wire transfers, fake contracts, all pointing to millions in fraud. But wait, there's more. Megan continued, pulling out another file. I found their divorce records, or should I say, the lack thereof. Pamela, Mark, and Margaret never legally divorced. Their paperwork was never filed. The room started spinning. So my marriage is technically invalid? They're still legally married. A sudden knock at the door made us both jump. It was Marcus, Margaret's ex. I've been trying to find the right time to tell you this, he said, settling into a chair. Margaret's been planning this for months. She never wanted the divorce. This whole thing, getting close to your family, playing the victim, it's all been a scheme to get back into the Anderson fortune. The Anderson fortune might not exist much longer. Megan interjected, pulling up more documents. Mark has been embezzling from Amanda's family trust. Millions transferred to offshore accounts, and guess who's been helping him? Rachel. Her signature is all over the paperwork. My sister-in-law wasn't just a spy, she was neck-deep in the fraud. The property sale in Dubai, Marcus added. That was their big play. They convinced Amanda to invest her entire trust fund. I had been recording everything, every gaslighting conversation, every manipulation. Hidden cameras in the living room caught Mark and Margaret's secret meetings. My phone recorded Amanda's veiled threats. You're just confused, Pamela. Maybe you need to see someone about these paranoid delusions. And then Mark's voice played back from another recording. We need to get you out first, Megan insisted. I've already contacted my bank. We can move your assets to new accounts they can't access. That night, I quietly packed a go bag while Mark was at yet another business meeting. The hidden camera in our bedroom had caught him and Margaret there just last week. Everything's ready, I whispered to Megan on the phone. The cameras are set up in every room. I've backed up all the evidence to secure servers. The FBI is very interested in those real estate schemes, she replied. And the IRS has some questions about those offshore accounts. I acted normal at dinner with Amanda, who was as condescending as ever. These headaches must be so hard for you, Margaret, she cooed across the table. Thank goodness Mark is here to help. Of course, Mother. Pamela understands, don't you? Rachel smirked. I smiled back, thinking about the evidence I had of her forged signatures on trust documents. Absolutely. Family comes first, right? Later, I overheard Mark on the phone. Everything's set for the Dubai transfer once Mom signs those papers tomorrow. I slipped away to text Megan. It's time. Set everything in motion. They thought they had the perfect plan. The manipulative ex-wife, the controlling mother, the two-faced sister, and my fraud of a husband. But their house of cards was about to collapse, and I would be there to watch it burn. The next morning, I stood up in the middle of Amanda's meticulously planned family brunch. I've called this family meeting because I have something important to share. I stood at the head of Amanda's grand mahogany dining table, my hands steady for the first time in months. The whole family was there. Mark, Margaret, Amanda, and Rachel, all wearing their usual smug expressions. First, let me congratulate you, Margaret, on your 10-year wedding anniversary. I began, my voice steady and clear. I clicked a button, and their actual marriage certificate appeared on the projector screen behind me. Still legally married to Mark. I see. That's ridiculous, Mark started, his face flushing. Save it. I cut him off. Here's your attempted divorce filing, never completed, never filed. Which means our marriage, Mark? Completely invalid. Bigamy is still a crime in Illinois. Margaret's face went pale, and Amanda clutched her pearls, her eyes wide with shock. This is absurd, Amanda sputtered. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said, turning to face her. Let's talk about the Dubai investment. Another click showed a series of bank statements on the screen. Your entire family trust funneled through shell companies. Want to guess where the money really went? Mark would never. Amanda tried to defend, her voice cracking. Show them, Marcus, I called out. Marcus stepped into the room carrying a stack of files, full documentation of the fraud scheme. Margaret's signature is all over everything. She never stopped being involved in the business, did she? I turned to Rachel, my sister-in-law. And you, Rachel? Those forged signatures on the trust documents? The IRS is very interested in those. You can't prove, Rachel started, but I cut her off by pressing play on the security footage. The room filled with the sound of Rachel and Mark discussing the fraud in explicit detail, followed by Victoria admitting to the marriage scam. Amanda's own daughter stealing from her accounts. The FBI is outside, I announced as sirens wailed in the distance. They're very interested in your real estate schemes, Mark. And the IRS is too. Pamela, honey, we can work this out, Mark said, trying to approach me. Like you worked out stealing my identity for business loans? That's federal fraud, by the way. Everything happened fast after that. The FBI stormed in, handcuffing Mark and Margaret. Rachel broke down, confessing on the spot, while Amanda fainted as soon as she saw the real numbers showing her emptied accounts. 1 year later, I'm sipping champagne in my newly expanded design studio. My company, Phoenix Designs, just landed a contract with the Ritz-Carlton chain. The irony? I'm redesigning the same hotels Mark lost in the fraud investigation. Mark is now serving 15 years for multiple fraud charges. Margaret is facing separate charges for bigamy and investment fraud. Their mugshots make quite a splash in the society pages. Rachel lost her job at the investment firm and was barred from the industry. Last I heard, she's working retail. Amanda, she had to sell her mansion after losing everything to Mark's schemes. Now she's living in a modest condo, a far cry from her previous luxury lifestyle. As for me, I just made Forbes' 40 Under 40 list. My story of surviving fraud and building a successful business caught Hollywood's attention, and there's even talk of a movie deal. Sometimes I drive past Amanda's old mansion, now owned by a tech billionaire who hired me to redesign it. I think about that day I served tea while Margaret wore my wedding dress. They thought they were breaking me. Instead, they made me unstoppable. The best revenge isn't just success. It's watching karma deliver the justice they never thought would come. What would you have done if you caught your spouse's ex wearing your wedding dress? Would you have walked away quietly like I initially did, or confronted them immediately? And do you think I was right to gather evidence first, or should I have exposed their schemes sooner?